Chiron had traveled through the greatest libraries, had pored over the greatest works, had debated with the sharpest minds of the age. He believed he had reached the threshold of absolute knowledge, where there was no question he could not answer. But there was one thing he would never admit to himself. Despite possessing all that knowledge, he still felt empty. Not because he lacked knowledge, but because he did not know what he was looking for. One day, a letter appeared on his desk. No seal, no sender, just a single line. You have come to the end of knowledge, but do you really understand it? He frowned, observing the paper as if it contained some kind of code. Was it an intellectual challenge? A riddle someone wanted him to solve? He flipped through it, but there was nothing else but that line. It wasn't a random question. It hit the weak spot he was still trying to deny. 2 days later, while he was still busy thinking about the meaning of the mysterious message, a stranger appeared at his door. The person didn't give his name, just handed him a smaller piece of paper with only 2 words, Tam Ket. He knew that name. Tam Ket wasn't a place but a legend. People said it was a province of wisdom where the greatest minds gathered to pursue the absolute perfection of thought. But that was just a legend. A story circulated among scholars as an ideal that never came true. There was no place where people were allowed to live outside the rules of society just to pursue pure knowledge. The stranger looked at him calmly as if he knew his reaction. If you really want to know if Tam Ket exists or not, follow me. The instinct of a seeker of truth told him that this was a moment not to be missed, but another part of him. The cold, rational part wondered if this was a joke, a trap, a test by some secret group. He didn't believe in meaningless arrangements, but he believed in meaningful coincidences. There were things that appeared not for us to understand immediately, but for us to choose. And he chose. He followed that stranger. Then the city as the sun set, passing through streets Chiron had never set foot on. From the brightly lit avenues, they gradually entered dark alleys, the hidden corners of the world that he didn't know still existed. And then they left the city into a land that the map didn't mark all the way. The guide didn't say a word, but he didn't need an answer. The only thing that mattered was that he was going where he needed to go that night. He didn't know how far he had walked, only knowing that when the first light of dawn broke, they were standing in front of a gate. That gate wasn't made of wood or stone, but also it didn't look like a portal. It was just an empty space between 2 cliffs, but when he looked through it, he felt like he was looking into another reality. The guide stopped and turned towards him. This is the point where people like you have to decide. If you go through, you can't go back the way you came. Chiron was silent. He didn't need to hear more. If this was a game, he had accepted the rules of the game from the first moment he stepped through, and the world behind. The portal swallowed him. He felt like he was falling. No gravity, no direction, no signs that he was still in physical space, but he didn't panic. His mind worked like a perfect machine, even in the most unusual situations. He didn't believe in fantasy things, no magic, much less a game that could break the laws of physics. He only believed in logic. If there was something he didn't understand, it wasn't because it couldn't be understood. It was because he didn't have enough data to explain it. The feeling of falling disappeared suddenly, as if space had just decided that he had reached his destination. He landed on a stone floor. There was no impact, no shock, just a simple change of state. He was standing in the middle of a large room, 4 walls rising endlessly, no clear light source, but everything was seen perfectly in front of him. There were 5 people sitting on stone benches like that, had been there for 1,000 years. No one introduced, no one expressed their emotions. They were simply entities, existing in this space, observing him with unfathomable eyes. One of them, who seemed to be the oldest, slowly spoke. "You have passed through the door, which means you are ready. But before you go any further, you must understand one thing. Illusionary path is not something that can be learned, it can only be abandoned." He frowned. A paradoxical statement, but not something he had never heard before. Ancient philosophers once said that the ultimate wisdom is not the accumulation of knowledge, but the elimination of what is unnecessary. But if that is true, then why does the heart connection exist? If everything is just for giving up, then why is there a game to conquer? The second person spoke up. "You think you came here to find answers, but what you will really find are questions you have never dared to face." The third person. "You believe that knowledge is light, but have you ever wondered, can light become darkness?" The fourth person said, "You have gone to the end of thought, but have you ever thought that thought itself is the final barrier?" The fifth man was silent. He waited for a question, a comment, a challenge. But the man said nothing, just looked at him as if he saw through him, as if he had seen everything he had ever known and believed and feared. He waited for a guide, a specific instruction on what to do next. But there were none. No rules, no challenges, no signs that this was a game in any conventional sense. He broke the silence. "So what do we do?" The eldest shook his head slowly. "We don't give you the answer because we don't hold the answer. You must find it for yourself. But before you can begin, answer one question. Do you really know who you are?" He laughed at the elementary question that was almost innocent, but he knew that if it was asked here, it couldn't be as simple as it looked. "I am Chiron. I am a man who has gone through all the greatest systems of knowledge of mankind. I have read, studied, thought to the end of every concept." Ilu the third smiled slightly. "So if I take away all of that, what do you have left?" He was about to answer immediately, but that question suddenly stopped his train of thought. If without knowledge, without thinking, without what he had learned, what was he? A living body, an empty consciousness, an existence without definition. The silence stretched on the fifth man, who had never said a word, then spoke, his voice softly but resounding as if it came from the space around him. "You don't know who you are, and therefore you are not ready to play." Everything around him disappeared. He fell again, but this time he was no longer sure if he was falling down or falling into himself. Chiron fell into an endless void, but this time there was no sense of panic, no fear of losing direction. He didn't know where he was, but it didn't matter anymore. What he had just heard and seen and experienced made him realize something he had never truly understood himself. If his knowledge was taken away, what was he? If the concepts of the world he believed in were just a shell, then where did his true nature lie? He didn't have time to think any longer. The space around him gradually took shape. Images appeared before his eyes, reflecting something familiar but strangely distorted. In front of him was a mirror, not a single mirror, but hundreds of thousands of fragments, each reflecting a different version of himself. A young, ambitious Chiron, eyes shining with the belief that knowledge was the key to everything. A tired old Chiron sat among hundreds of books, but his eyes were empty, as if he knew everything, but there was nothing left to seek. A Chiron with an arrogant gaze, standing on the podium, looking down at those who were listening to him as if he were the truth. A skinny Chiron with a weary gaze, wandering among the ruins of a civilization he once believed he could understand. They all looked at him. No one said anything, but he felt something deeper than words. An invisible questioning, a pressure, as if those entities were waiting for him to do something. He tried to walk, but realized there was no way out, only mirrors, versions of himself stretching to infinity. A voice rang out, not from anyone in the mirrors, but from his own mind. "Who are you looking for?" He didn't answer, but the voice didn't stop. "What are you trying to escape from?" He gritted his teeth. This isn't reality. This is just another challenge of the game. He didn't let himself get caught up in nonsense. But then one of his entities in the mirror spoke. "Chiron, you sure you're not?" Scared, he turned around. That self. It wasn't some other version of him, it was him as he was now. You believed you could find the truth, but you never dared to ask if the truth didn't exist. Then why did he feel something cold running down his spine? You believed you were a wise man, but if all you knew was an illusion, then why did he want to deny it but couldn't? You thought you could control your perception, but if that perception was a prison, then why did he clench his fist? It felt like everything was collapsing, as if the foundation of his own being was being pulled away from reality. The mirrors began to crack. His other selves disappeared one by one, leaving only him and the one facing him. The only one looking straight at him with eyes that held no doubt he knew what was coming. If this really was a game, then he had only one way to move forward. He stepped forward without hesitation and punched his own image in the mirror. The shattering sound rang out like an explosion, silent explosion. The glass shards fell, but instead of hitting the ground, they disappeared into nothingness, leaving nothing but darkness, and then a door opened. Not a physical door, but a void leading to something indescribable. Another reality, a deeper level of the game. He knew he had to enter, and this time he was no longer sure if he was still Chiron as before. Chiron stepped through the door, or perhaps the door itself had sucked him into a new reality. The space around him changed instantly. No more darkness, no more mirrors reflecting other versions of himself. Now he stood in the middle of a giant hall where the walls were carved with thousands of characters. Symbolic formulas of the civilizations he had studied. In front of him was a long stone table, and on the table was a riddle. No guide, no mysterious voice appeared this time, only the riddle waiting for him to decipher. Fill in the blanks, what exists but cannot be grasped, what is understood but not inexpressible, what is present everywhere but cannot be seen. Chiron read through the question once, a simple question, no. It can't be that simple. This is a game for the greatest minds. It can't be an easy challenge. He ran through each possibility in his head. Time. No time can be measured. Consciousness. No consciousness can be experienced. Nothingness. No nothingness cannot exist. He thought deeper, faster. This question was not just a test of his intellect, but a test of how he thought. If he approached it with pure logic, he would fall into the same endless loop. But if he used intuition, he would risk getting lost in the ambiguity. A thought crossed his mind. What if he couldn't answer at that moment? He felt the air around him change. Space seemed to close, as if this puzzle didn't exist only in his mind, but also controlled the reality. Here a voice rang out, not coming from any direction, but echoing from the very stone below him. Don't you realize it's your thoughts that are imprisoning you? Chiron frowned. He didn't like the simple philosophical paradoxes. Knowledge must be systematic, must have logic. But was that really true? He suddenly remembered what the masters in the dark had said. You believe that knowledge is light. But have you never asked yourself, can light become darkness? And then he realized he was stuck, but not because the riddle was too difficult, but because he himself considered finding the answer. The most important thing, he had lived his whole life searching for the truth, but he had never asked himself what would happen if the truth could not be found. His hand touched the stone in front of him, his finger traced a single letter in the blank space of the riddle. No. Nothing could be grasped. Nothing could be expressed. Nothing could be seen. The moment the word no was carved, the entire room shook, the characters on the wall began to fade, as if the entire foundation of knowledge he had believed in was dissolving. But he was not afraid. He stood still, silently watching everything collapse around him. He had found the answer, but what was more frightening was that he was no longer sure that he really wanted to know it. A new door opened before his eyes. No more rocks, no more walls, just a void leading to something he had never imagined. This time, he stepped in without hesitation. Chiron stepped through the door and realized that there was nothing to step on. No ground, no sky, no any support, but he still existed. Still moved like that. Reality was now just an invisible flow around him, a white void, no light, no darkness, no sound, no silence, an absolute empty space. But empty did not mean meaningless. In front of him, a giant stone tablet appeared as if it had always been there, waiting for him to come on the surface. The lines of words began to appeared slowly, as if someone was writing right in front of him. But when he tried to read, the words disappeared as soon as his eyes met them. He blinked, trying to concentrate. None of the words lasted long enough for him to grasp. He tried to remember what he had just seen, but his memory was also blank, as if all notions of words were being erased from his mind the moment they appeared. A voice rang out from nowhere, as if it came from the very flow of space.